Hi everybody, welcome to this video which provides an introduction to William Shakespeare's famous play, Hamlet. Hamlet might be the most widely known work of literature written in the last 1,000 years. In many ways, Hamlet the play has become a kind of symbol for literature as such, and Hamlet the character has become the archetypal fictional character. Shakespeare himself has become the world's most famous writer. Hamlet is widely accepted to be his masterpiece, the greatest work of literature by the greatest writer who ever lived. This is a lot of pressure to put on poor Hamlet, and it's an irony of the cosmos, one that Hamlet would deeply appreciate. That Hamlet's whole thing, or one of his whole things, is that he's famously considered to be lousy at rising up to the expectations that his existence is constantly presenting him with. If a literary critic traveled back in time and into the register of fiction to tell Hamlet that he was fated to be the most famous character in the most famous work of literature by the most famous writer in human history, Hamlet would start off by making fun of the critic and insulting him in terms that the critic was too dim-witted to understand. Then Hamlet would probably do everything in his power to get out of his own play as quickly as possible, which is not too different from what he actually does in the actual play. One of the most characteristic things about Hamlet, that is that he resists and resents efforts to pin him down, to get him to fit into pre-existing genres, stereotypes, and plots. It is this very quality, the character's variability, elusiveness, and mystery, that makes him seem so human, even though he's just a bunch of words on a page. One way of thinking about the trajectory of this class, Beowulf to Everyman to Canterbury Tales to Hamlet, is that it is a kind of archaeological excavation into the emergence of our modern concept of what it means to be human. Beowulf was mostly an action hero puppet until he fell under the shadow of death and started to resemble a real human being. Everyman was a recognizable allegory of a human being, but completely abstracted from any individual personality. The characters in Chaucer have a great deal of individuality in their earthiness and humor, but Chaucer's characters are still sentimentalized and broadly drawn. In the character of Hamlet, we find someone who is thoughtful, sad, excitable, confused, self-contradictory, possibly a little insane, but also prone to flashes of insight and observation that demonstrate his creativity, his quirkiness, his interiority, the sense that there is more to him than just the sum of his parts. There is a life, a mind, a depth that we recognize as distinctively human. Indeed, this cluster of qualities gives an impression of humanness to many of Shakespeare's characters, and Shakespeare scholar Harold Bloom has gone so far as to say that Shakespeare invented the human, in the modern sense that we use the term, that when we recognize ourselves in Shakespeare's characters, it's not that the characters resemble us, but that we resemble them. If we agree that a human is internalized, self-contradictory, and multidimensional, that we make ourselves into the people we are by listening to the things we say to ourselves, it's because Shakespeare taught us to be that way. Whether or not you agree with the hard version of Bloom's thesis, it is undeniable that Shakespeare's artistry, especially his representations of his characters, constitutes an enormous breakthrough in the artistic representation of human beings, especially when compared to the works of Shakespeare's predecessors or contemporaries, and possibly compared to the work of just about any writer, at least until the 19th century. It is similar to the effect of perspective and anatomy in Renaissance visual art, where people and places in paintings actually started looking like actual people and places. But unlike perspective and anatomy, it's not a science that can be taught. There's no magic formula to how Shakespeare made his characters seem so human, or if there is, no one has figured it out. In the case of Hamlet, it might even be at least partly by accident. What I mean by that is that the version of Hamlet that we read today is actually an amalgamation of several different versions of the play that Shakespeare developed and tweaked over many years. Like one of the only other world historical geniuses that Shakespeare can be compared to, Socrates, Shakespeare never had any interest in writing down his work for future generations. He wrote for the theater, for the performance. He would change his scripts for different audiences, and when Shakespeare died, the play, Hamlet, existed in a number of different manuscripts, sometimes the notes that the actors wrote to help them remember their lines. And the work of reconstituting Hamlet involved patching these shreds and patches together. To me, I think this is one of the reasons why Hamlet's character is so volatile and unpredictable, because one scene is taken from one version of the play, and then the next scene is taken from a different version, so we are left wondering at how erratic and inscrutable Hamlet is, in part because of how these different versions collide with one another. But if this textual ambiguity is part of the effect of why Hamlet is such a riddle, this effect also coexists with other disjunctive effects. For another thing, the ancient Danish legend of Amleth, the source that Shakespeare used to write Hamlet, may be almost as old as the story of Beowulf, and it had been told in many different iterations. Shakespeare drew on different versions of the story, as well as other similar revenge tragedies, to compose his version. Then there is the theme of Hamlet's madness, and the eternal question of whether Hamlet is acting mad on purpose to confuse his enemies, or whether he's really mad, or whether both of these things are true, or whether Shakespeare is suggesting, as he does elsewhere in his body of work, that madness is actually a higher form of sanity. Yet another disjunctive element of the play is that the Hamlet story is an early medieval tale of ghosts, incest, and fratricide, while Shakespeare characterizes his Hamlet as a late medieval scholar and skeptic, as if a modern person had been thrust into a pre-modern narrative. For Hamlet, it's almost like he's expected to play a role in a story that doesn't match up with the kind of character he is. He is out of joint with his own narrative cosmos, and his story is about how he tries to negotiate the discrepancy between who he is and where he is, his self and his world. All of these aspects of Hamlet make it a story about the nature of human reality itself. Synopsis of the plot might tell you that Hamlet is a prince who has to avenge his father's death, but the real drama is about the relationship between a human being and their world, and how that relationship throws into question both terms in the equation, what a human being is and what kind of world they live in. For the question of Hamlet's identity, sane or insane, comic or tragic, explicable or inexplicable, is backgrounded by the ambiguities in his environment. The revelation that his uncle killed his father is just the most obvious instance of a generalized specter that things are not what they seem. Are people nice just because they smile? Is a woman's love real or simulacral? Is a beautiful woman's face anything more than a grinning skull? Can you trust your lover when they say they love you? Can you trust your parents when they tell you that they love you? What is your mother up to when you're not around? Is there any consolation in life for the suffering of grief and pain? And is there any meaning to life at all? Is there any justice? Is there any point to doing anything, including trying to pursue justice? Is all of human life nothing more than a conspiracy of sin and greed and betrayal? And what about the afterlife? According to Hamlet's dad, there's not much to look forward to there either. T.S. Eliot famously said that Hamlet's sadness lacks any objective correlative, that it is in excess of any actual cause. But profound existential melancholy might also be considered a rational and even enlightened attitude in the face of a world so full of duplicity, cravenness, and rampant stupidity. To the extent that you have felt the same way at various times in your own life, you are Hamlet, and this is your story.